Olá a todos e a todas, boa tarde. Sejam bem-vindos a mais nosso seminário, né, sobre águas, transfronteiriças ao redor do mundo. Hoje estamos recebendo o professor Richard Meissner.
Sejam bem-vindos a mais seminário, né, sobre águas, transfronteiriças ao redor do mundo. Hoje estamos recebendo o professor Richard Meissner. Sejam bem-vindos a mais seminário, né, sobre águas, transfronteiriças ao redor do mundo.
Ok, sorry. Novamente, então, pessoal, obrigado por todos estarem aqui presentes em mais um seminário sobre águas transfronteiriças ao redor do mundo. Hoje apresentando o professor Richard Meissner, da Universidade da África do Sul. Vou fazer uma pequena apresentação antes de tudo, eu gostaria de agradecer, né, aos órgãos de fomento que apoiam nossas pesquisas aqui no GEOPO, na Universidade Federal da Bahia, que nós estamos realizando essa série de seminários, né? Em primeiro lugar, eu gostaria de agradecer, né, a FAPESP, Fundação de Amparo à Pesquisa do Estado de São Paulo, o CNPq, o Instituto de Estudos Avançados da USP, o IPGH USP, o POIGEA UFBA. Então, vou apresentar primeiro em português o professor Richard Meissner, né, que é pesquisador sênior e doutor em Política Internacional pela Universidade de Pretória, na África do Sul. Desde a sua graduação, ele esteve envolvido em vários projetos de pesquisa em questões relacionadas à política da água, quanto um campo de estudo das relações internacionais. Ele publicou diversos trabalhos nessa área, mas com diversos estudos se ramificando tanto nas relações internacionais quanto na ciência política. Como pesquisador sênior do Conselho de Pesquisa Científica e Industrial da África do Sul, CSIR. Ele tem se envolvido em vários projetos de pesquisa que investigam uma variedade de aspectos na gestão da água e outros recursos naturais. O foco de suas pesquisas no CSR inclui papel transnacional, envolvimento de grupos de interesse na gestão de recursos hídricos, a gestão dos recursos hídricos em nível comunal e municipal, as práticas de gestão de água de corporações, a produção de conhecimento e a influência de paradigmas e teorias sobre políticas, planos e programas da água e mudanças climáticas. Enquanto trabalhava para o CSR, ele fez um extenso trabalho de campo em uma variedade de áreas na África Meridional, com foco em governos locais e bacias hidrográficas transfronteiriças. Ele também é um pesquisador com classificação C3 da National Research Foundation. Then, Richard, let me introduce you in English again. First of all, I have to thank the research funding we get here in Brazil, like FAPESP, CNPq, and our home institutions like Federal University of Bahia, where I'm hosted, and University of São Paulo. And okay, let me introduce Professor Richard. He's a senior researcher and holds a doctoral fellow in international politics from University of Pretoria. Since his graduation, has been involved in numerous research projects on matters relating to water politics and international relations. He has published a great deal in this area, but have since branched off in more work pertaining to political science. A senior researcher at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, he has been involved in several research projects investigating a variety of aspects in the management of water and other natural resources. His research focus at the CSIR include the transnational role and involvement of interest groups in water resource management, the management of water resources at communal and municipal level, the water management practice of corporations, the production of knowledge and influence of paradigms and theories on water and climate change policies, plans and programs. While working for the CSIR, he has done extensive field work in a variety of areas in Southern Africa, focusing on local governments and transboundary river basins. He's also a National Research Foundation C3 rated researcher in South Africa. Many thanks, Richard, for your willingness to join us here in our webinars. And okay, the floor is yours. I'm going to share your presentation here. Okay.
Thank you very much, Luis, for the kind introduction. Yes, I'm now currently with the University of South Africa's Department of Political Sciences. I joined UNISA in February this year, and Before that, I was for 10 years with the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This evening I'm going to talk to you about Southern African transboundary water, the environment and non-state actors. Luis, could you go to the next slide, please? Okay. The focus of my talk is the Southern African region. Now, the Southern African region can be defined geographically or politically. Geographically, Southern Africa consists of Angola, Botswana, Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland, Lesotho, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And this is a UN sub-region. Politically, the Southern African Development Community consists of 16 member states. It's these states that are included under the geographical definition of Southern Africa, plus the Comores, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Madagascar, Malawi, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Tanzania. The Comores, Madagascar, Mauritius, and Seychelles are Indian Ocean states and are not part of the Southern African or the African landmass. Next slide, please. Here we see a map of the SADC, its political configuration or political definition, with the 16 member states shown on this map, and you can see the island states of Mauritius and Seychelles. Comores is also visible between the African landmass and Madagascar. Next slide, Luis, please. With this map, I'm going to show you the water distribution or the rainfall distribution across the African continent, including Southern Africa. Now, as you can see, the dark blue areas are areas that receive very high rainfall on an annual basis. For instance, we have on the left-hand side Gabon, and on the right-hand side you have the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the Congo River is situated, and down towards the south you have Namibia, which is one of the driest countries in Southern Africa, and also bottom right-hand corner we have an area called Lephalale in South Africa, which is a semi-arid region. That being said, rainfall distribution decreases from north to south in Southern Africa, and in from west to east across the landmass, typically where Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa, and parts of Zimbabwe and Mozambique are located. Next slide, please. This map indicates the number of large dams located throughout the Southern African region. These are dams, the blue or the purple dots that you see on the map. They represent dams with a 1 million cubic liter capacity. Those photos that I present on this map, they are dams situated in South Africa. As you can see, South Africa has the largest number of dams spread across its geographical reach, followed by Zimbabwe, and then Namibia and Angola and Zambia. This map also reflects the economic development within Southern Africa, with South Africa having the largest number of dams. Indicates the economy being dependent on water resources. And those dams that you see there in the slide, from left to right, you have there on top left-hand corner, you have the Boegoeberg Dam on the Orange River, the Bloemhof Dam just below it, also in the Orange River Basin on the Vaal River. Then you have the Loskop Dam down below in the Olifants River. Top right-hand corner, you have the Vaal Dam overspilling. That's also on the Vaal River. Down below, just below that, you have the Maguga Dam in Eswatini. or Eswatini used for the generation of hydroelectric power, and the bottom right-hand picture of that dam is the Katsi Dam in the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. These dams, numerous dams within South Africa are interconnected. For instance, the Katsi Dam is connected to the Vaal Dam, and also the Bloemhof Dam, and eventually the Boegoeberg Dam in the Orange River, since it transfers water from the Lesotho Highlands to the Vaal River system in near the economic heartland of South Africa. Next slide, please. This map indicates the shared river basins spread across southern Africa. We see numerous rivers, transboundary rivers located in the sub-region. And this evening I'm going to talk about the transnational politics in the Nkomati River Basin and the Okavango River Basin, indicated in red on the slide. Next slide, please. Non-state actors, their role and involvement in the Nkomati-Lesotho water management area. I will talk to this river basin, this transboundary river basin, focusing on integrated water resources management and adaptive water governance, and how non-state actors are involved in IWRM and adaptive water governance, not only involved, but also in the uptake of these theoretical principles within the water management area. And then secondly, I'm going to talk about non-state actor involvement in the Okavango River, focusing specifically on oil exploration and the climate change debate. Next slide, please, Louis. In the Nkomati-Lesotho water management area, there has been involvement by both South African and scientists from the Netherlands. South African scientists have, especially after the end of the Cold War and the dawning of the new South Africa, introduced integrated water resources management, which was embraced by policymakers and scientists alike. Integrated water resources management is an imperative of the National Water Act. As such, IWRM can be considered a new liberal technocratic approach. Next slide, please. Strategic adaptive management has also been introduced into the Nkomati-Lesotho water management area, particularly with respect to the operation of the catchment management agency operating in that area. This catchment management agency, called the Nkomati-Lesotho Catchment Management Agency, has adopted strategic adaptive management as one of its operating principles. And strategic adaptive management is considered an expression of American pragmatism. So we see here integrated water resources management, a new liberal technocratic approach, and also strategic adaptive management, an expression of American pragmatism, being had been introduced into the South African water management discourse. Now, the Nkomati-Lesotho Catchment Management Agency was the first catchment management agency to be established in South Africa. South Africa's catchment management agencies, the central pivot on which they operate is decentralization for the improvement of water management at local level. A next imperative for catchment management agencies is that they must promote community participation. In other words, it is water management or water governance devolved down to the lowest tier of governance, and that is the communal level. Catchment management agencies in South Africa are statutory bodies And as such, integrated water resources management and strategic adaptive management are central theoretical approaches, since IWRM is an imperative to the national built within the National Water Act. Catchment management agencies also have to develop catchment management strategies, and within these catchment management strategies, strategic adaptive management is applied by water managers. Next slide, please. Within the Nkomathi-Sotho water management area, governed by the Nkomathi-Sotho Catchment Management Agency, scientists have played various expert advisory roles in the adoption of technocratic blueprints like IWRM and strategic adaptive management. This signal came from the National Water Act. As I said already, integrated water resources management is an imperative built into the National Water Act, and the National Water Act is also the main regulatory mechanism. So we can see here that the National Water Act has had a major influence on scientists operating as expert advisors in adopting in advancing technocratic blueprints like IWRM and strategic adaptive management. In fact, many scientists consider IWRM and strategic adaptive management as the way to go in managing or governing South Africa's water resources within the Catchment Management Agency structure. But it's not only South African scientists that has played a role within the Nkomathi-Sotho water management area. We've also seen the involvement of Dutch researchers, and they have conducted research in the water management area to help to improve public participation mechanisms of the IUCMA's management. So we see that public participation is a central feature or central governing feature within the Catchment Management Agency structure and also the South Africa's water management areas. For these Dutch researchers, they focused primarily on key performance indicators, and one of these are the feedback loops to improve public participation. And the aim of these feedback loops is a better management strategy, not only the better management strategy of the water, but also for those depending on the water resources for a livelihood. Next slide, please. So as I said, the aim of researchers within the Nkomathi-Sotho water management area is to achieve better management strategy that's for the benefit of the stakeholders and also better water quality. In other words, we see here water security defined as better water quality being put at the forefront of water management within the Catchment Management Agency. The involvement of South African as well as Dutch researchers indicates a transnational exchange of ideas. We see that Dutch perspectives, practices and scholarship in water law and management being practiced within the Catchment Management Agency. They also focus on the involvement of women in water management, and as well as gender in relation to water and incentivizing compliance in water governance. Next slide, please, Louise. Dutch researchers also in the past investigated past discriminatory practices within South Africa. And their focus was mainly on South African and Dutch licensing law, with Dutch licensing law informing or trying to influence the uptake of these licensing laws into the South African legislation. And then also they focused on the risk perception among stakeholders and practitioners within the Nkomathi-Sotho water management area. Next slide, please. The Okavango River Basin, here I'm going to talk about oil exploration within the climate change debate. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background with respect to the Okavango River. It has its source in central Angola on the B Plateau. It has a total length of 1,727 kilometers and a mean annual runoff of plus minus 10 to 11.6 billion cubic meters. It forms the border between Angola and Namibia for approximately 400 kilometers, and after crossing over the Botswana-Namibia border, it flows for 100 kilometers and forms the Okavango Delta. The delta stretches over 5,000 square kilometers, situated entirely in Botswana, with the delta being a Ramsar site since 1996, when Botswana signed the Ramsar Convention. Next slide, please. The Okavango Delta is a prominent feature of the river basin, as you can see in the map. In 1992, we've already seen that pressure groups lobbied against water abstraction for mining from the Okavango Delta. And because of its Ramsar status, there is currently also a lobbying campaign against oil exploration within the Okavango Basin, particularly within the Namibian portion of the Okavango River Basin. Next slide, please. This lobbying campaign is aimed at Recon Africa, which is a Canadian oil and gas company, and their aim is the exploration in the Okavango Basin, which is situated in northeast Namibia and northwest Botswana. They started drilling for exploration wells in January 2021, so it is a very recent political development within that river basin. And in April 2021, they discovered there was a discovery of a working petroleum system indicating oil and gas presence in Namibia. According to Recon Africa, there is a promise of long-term energy security for Namibia should the oil and gas finds be viable. However, interest groups, they have another idea, and they have started a campaign against the exploration company within that portion of Namibia where Recon Africa is active. Towards that, a number of environmental, faith-based and human rights interest groups formed a coalition around various issues. We see that environmental interest groups, their main contention is that oil and oil exploration carries climate change risks and the destruction of the delta. We see faith-based organizations arguing that God's creation is not to be tampered with, and they also highlight negative socioeconomic impact, and they've even considered the exploration for oil as a form of genocide. Human rights interest groups, they focus more on the plight of indigenous peoples within the area, as well as local communities and women. Now, this coalition of various interest groups, they've played a number of agential roles. Next slide, please, Louise. Next slide, Louise. They have played a number of agential roles, including they've played an interactive role where they did not only interact with Recon Africa, but also with the Namibian as well as the Botswana government. In recent months, they have also interacted with the Canadian government, lobbying the Canadian government for the seizing of oil exploration in that area. They've also played a representation role, not only representing indigenous communities, women, and communities, but also representing the environment, especially when considering that they argue against oil exploration, saying that it can have dire consequences for the Okavango Delta, which is a Ramsar site. And then, of course, they've played a transnational role. This transnational role consists of firstly of the coalition of interest groups based in various countries around the world: Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, Canada. There are even interest groups as far afield as Germany, due to Namibia's close links with Germany, and it had being a colony of Germany. There is that historical link. The interest groups have also played a policy shaping role in asking for more stringent legislation around oil exploration within the basin, both by asking Namibia and Botswana for stricter legislation. And then, of course, they've also played a watchdog role. And here we see the role of scientists also coming into the fray. Scientists, especially climate change scientists, have warned that through their projections, climate change models, that area where the oil exploration is taking place is a high risk area from a climate change perspective, and their models indicate that it might become a very dry area in the next couple of decades, and therefore oil exploration is a no-no there. And then, of course, these interest groups, they've also played an oppositional role, especially oppositional in opposition to Recon Africa. They've also played a guardian role and also a safety provider role in providing services to local communities, helping them with media campaigns and also lobbying against the government. Next slide, please. Okay, looking ahead in the Okavango River Basin, this is not the first time that interest groups have lobbied against developments within the Okavango River Basin. In the early 1990s, a coalition of interest groups, particularly environmental interest groups, including Greenpeace, lobbied the Botswana government against water abstraction for mining purposes. At that time, the Botswana government was planning to abstract water from the Okavango Delta and transport that water to a large diamond mine called the Rapa Diamond Mine, east of the Delta. Now, climate change is a prominent issue. And climate change, as we know, is linked to hydrocarbons and the development and exploration of hydrocarbons. And as I've said already, scientists' climate change projections shows the exploration region can expect higher temperatures in future. In other words, it's a climate hotspot. So so we see the developments from the early 1990s where climate change wasn't such a prominent issue up until now, where the interest groups are now centering their campaign around around climate change and the climate change discourse, arguing that that region where the exploration is taking place is a climate hotspot. So any development perceived as negatively impacting the basin, and especially the Delta and its people, the people that are dependent on the Okavango Delta, could in future be resisted. And this is due to the prominence of the Delta as a Ramsar site and a tourist haven. However, the climate change projections showing that that region is becoming a climate change hotspot, or could become a climate change hotspot in future, will add another layer to the prominence of the Okavango River Basin as a basin not to be tampered with for whatever reason. So what we see both in the Ikuvangu and the Nkumati Usutu water management area is not only the water politics surrounded by or informed by scientific knowledge and the development of scientific knowledge, but we also see non-state actors and particularly environmental, faith-based, and human rights interest groups playing their role within to exert influence within a transboundary river basin, and also playing a transnational role in the stopping of oil exploration within the Okavango River. Next slide, please, Luis. And that will be my last slide to say thank you very much for listening.
Many thanks, Richard, for your presentation. Yeah, it's good to know different perspectives about the issue of the water waters, and knowing more about Southern Africa river basins and the challenges you are facing there in South Africa. So before going to the Q&A sessions, Richard, and please, everyone who's hearing us, please send your questions via the YouTube chat. I'm going to call Henrique Castro. He's going to make a short summary, a brief summary of Richard's presentations in Portuguese for us, and then we go for Q&A sessions. Please, Henrique, the floor is yours.
Obrigado, Luiz. Obrigado, professor Richard. Eu vou então fazer, como o Luiz falou, um resumo rápido da apresentação do professor. E o professor começou falando um pouco sobre o sul-africano, né, que ele tem duas definições, uma definição da UNESCO, que é da ONU, que é uma região geográfica com alguns países, que ela é um pouco estendida. Por exemplo, a região geográfica vai até mais ou menos Angola, e tem um grupo político de países membros que daí estende um pouco até o Congo, a Tanzânia. E daí ele mostrou também um pouco da distribuição de chuvas nessa área, que como ela diminui indo mais um pouco para o sul, como ela tem também uma diminuição drástica na Namíbia, onde tem um deserto. E depois ele mostrou a distribuição de represas. A maioria das represas está na África do Sul, que é a maior economia da região, e que elas são muito conectadas, assim, muitas no mesmo rio. E depois ele começou a falar mais especificamente sobre duas bacias transfronteiriças, que são a bacia do Nkomati e o Sutu, e ele começou a falar algumas das características da gestão nessa bacia. Ele contou bastante sobre a influência de cientistas sul-africanos e holandeses na região, que existe um incentivo muito forte para uma gestão a nível local, tentando incentivar uma participação comunitária na área, tentando colocar mecanismos regulatórios que façam que melhore a participação pública, e também que existem vários objetivos de melhor gerenciamento, né, dos atores envolvidos, que dependem das águas, e também para uma melhor qualidade da água da bacia. E ele trouxe também como existe uma nova perspectiva, principalmente nessa relação que ele traz com cientistas sul-africanos e holandeses, de perspectivas novas de legislação, por exemplo, de participação de mulheres, de outras iniciativas assim. E na bacia do Okavango, ele contou bastante sobre uma coisa que é bem recente, que está começando uma exploração de petróleo, que descobriram a reserva de petróleo esse ano ainda lá na Namíbia, e que existe uma coalizão de grupos com vários interesses distintos entre eles, mas que se juntaram para tentar impedir essa ação dos governos que querem transformar isso numa área de extração. Então ele traz, por exemplo, que existem grupos que estão pautados pela questão ambiental, que são principalmente do delta do Okavango, uma questão até de fé que ele traz, alguns grupos religiosos que se opõem, e uma questão também de direitos humanos, levando em conta alguns povos indígenas que seriam afetados com essas extrações de petróleo. E ele coloca também que não é a primeira vez que existem esses papéis de intervenção, de tentar se opor a alguma coisa que acontece na bacia do Okavango, que isso já aconteceu antes, e que esses grupos, eles, como o que está acontecendo hoje, eles buscam sempre trazer papéis de interação, de representação, de entendimento transnacional da situação, político, fazer uma oposição, uma vigilância e prover segurança também para as comunidades locais. E nos anos 90 também ele traz o exemplo que também teve uma tentativa de extração de água para levar para uma mina de diamante, de pedras preciosas, e que tiveram grupos da ONGs também que se opuseram a isso. E hoje um tema muito importante que colocam na pauta, principalmente nesse caso do Okavango, é das mudanças climáticas, pelo delta do Okavango ser um hotspot climático, então uma destruição ambiental dele seria muito grave. E acho que é mais ou menos por aí um resumo rápido da apresentação do professor Richard.
Thank you, Henrique. Obrigado, Henrique. Okay, let's go for the Q&A session. Richard, we have 2 questions here from Professor Wagner and Professor Fabiana Pecoraro. I'm going to include one for myself. And maybe if you will start with the Professor Wagner Ribeiro questions, I'm going to, you can read at the chat on our right side here, but I'm going to send here on the screen. And Professor Wagner asks, how does Angola and Namibia's participation on Ramsar Convention help or not water governance in the Okavango River? Do you think we make a set of 3 questions? What do you think, Richard? Your mic's muted, Richard.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer now, or let's make a set of 3 questions?
Yeah. Let me answer. Let me answer quickly. Okay. So Angola became a member of the Ramsar Convention less than a month ago. Tomorrow it would be a month ago, on the 11th of October 2021, and Namibia has been if I remember correctly, a participant because for a number of decades now, because there is down in the Orange River mouth, which is also if I'm not mistaken, a Ramsar site. Angola, since it joined the Ramsar Convention, it's still early days to say what influence that will have on Angola and Angola's view of the Okavango Delta being a Ramsar site. There has been talk within Namibian water circles that Angola is planning to implement some irrigation works upstream in the Okavango River basin, upstream from the delta and the portion with the Kubango and in the Kubango and Kavango area of Angola. So I don't think that will have an immediate impact. I mean the signing of the Ramsar Convention by Angola only less than a month ago, as I said. However, what happens is that since Angola and Namibia and Botswana are also, all 3 are now Ramsar, they've signed the Ramsar Convention, and what this inadvertently does is it opens an avenue for environmental interest groups to put pressure on any governmental plan to develop water from the within the Okavango River basin, or even oil exploration, as we see now since January, the activities of environmental interest groups and human rights interest groups. So what happens is that since all 3 countries are signatories, environmental interest groups can use this as a political pressure point to highlight to these 3 basin states the norms contained within the Ramsar Convention, especially when it comes to wetlands and the protection of wetlands, and also the protection and importance of wildlife. So although I don't see that Angola and Namibia's participation in the Ramsar Convention help or cannot help water governance, I think that for me it's more a case of interest groups using the convention and telling the basin countries, reminding them that they are signatories and that they have an obligation towards the Okavango Delta in safeguarding or persevering the natural environment in and around the Okavango Delta.
Many thanks, Richard. And let me make the second question from Fabiana Pecoraro here. She asked may you describe how you see the relationship between environmental education and community participation in the management of water resources in the region?
Yes. Community participation, environmental education and community participation, especially in South Africa, and also in countries like Botswana, play a significant role, especially when it comes to the imparting of knowledge by scientists onto individuals within communities. So I know of two cases in KwaZulu-Natal, a province here in South Africa, and also our Eastern Cape province, where scientists are collaborating closely with community members in water governance and in environmental governance in particular. And I also, some of my colleagues at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, they are now involved in a similar initiative on environmental education and community participation within the Okavango river basin, especially within Angola. So we see that, and in the last couple of years, environmental education and community participation has become so to say a focal point of many researchers within South Africa doing masters and PhD studies within these communities, and while at the same time educating and being educated by communities on water governance.
Thank you, Richard. And let me include one question for myself. When you described your case study, and you were talking about the transnational community and how their role in the transboundary region, the Transboundary River Basin. So my question is, how do you think making a difference about the transnational water politics and maybe a transboundary water politics? Does it make sense to make a differentiation about this in a broader sense of thinking about how these connections in the transnational networks, like you were explaining to us, for the researcher networks, the environmentalist networks, and a transboundary community, a transboundary river basin? Do you think it's two kinds of different levels of analysis for transboundary river basins?
I don't think that it's two levels. I think since we're talking here about transboundary river basins and looking at the transnational role and involvement of non-state actors within transboundary river basins, when I started out conducting research on transboundary river basins about 28 years ago, there was talk about transboundary water politics from a, let's call it a realist, an international relations perspective of realism or neorealism, where one looks at the state and particularly how states interact with each other around transboundary rivers. The focus there was a lot on the treaties that they have signed, and also the conventions that they belong to, and also the diplomatic relations between states when it comes to the management and sharing of transboundary waters. The research that I conducted about 15 years ago on the transnational role and involvement of interest groups, I conducted that study from more of a social constructivist perspective, pushing new liberalism and new realism as international relations theories a little to the side, and looking at the transnational role and involvement, and how interest groups, how they use norms and how they articulate norms and how they develop norms to argue against large dam projects. So from a political science perspective, if you look at traditional transboundary water politics, it was very much infused by realism, new realism. It had a state-centric focus. And then if you look at transnational role involvement of interest groups, there was more of a social constructivist perspective going on, and the analyses being conducted from that perspective, and looking more at the non-state actors. For me, there used to be a separation of the levels, but I think it's an artificial separation. And that artificial separation happened within the academia, where you had scientists, whether it's political or environmental scientists, who come from a positivist research paradigm, where they look at states and the relations between states, and they also focused their research on international law and conflict and cooperation. Whereas from a social constructivist perspective and from an interpretivist research paradigm, there was more a focus on states and non-state actors operating within transboundary river basins. However, in reality, these things come together and they create complex, interdependent water politics within a river basin. Research that we've conducted together with colleagues of mine at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research on the Limpopo River Basin, for instance, showed that the complexity within a very small portion of the Limpopo River Basin, up in the north towards the border of Zimbabwe, can be just as complex as when you look at it from a realist transboundary water politics perspective, and even more complex when you bring in the non-state actors. So that's why I'm saying that the separation is, in my opinion, artificial, and it shouldn't be artificial. I think if one incorporates, if you bring in complexity thinking into the fray, into a transboundary water politics research agenda, then all these nuances of state, non-state, international relation, international agreements, international water law, interest group actors playing a role, and lobbying against governments, then you start to see a picture that is very, very complex and a dense, let's call it a conglomeration of state and non-state actors operating within transboundary river basins.
Thanks, Professor Richard. Yeah, I agree. It's sometimes we have to make difference of levels for the whole of analysis, or for didactic, for being pedagogical or descriptive about the phenomenon, but at the border region, all these levels and connections are intertwined. it's different to it's difficult to make a separation. It's just it's just for the sake of maybe for our analysis.
If I might add, that separation can also have political implications. If we look at transboundary river basins from, let's say, for instance, from a neorealist or a neoliberalist international relations perspective, we will focus on the states and the institutions created by states within those river basins, and we will sort of forget, or our focus won't fall on the other water governance and water politics relations going on within the river basins, especially at communal level. And a couple of years ago, years back, I think it was the USAID. They had an initiative which they called the Transboundary River Basin Kit or something like that. And the purpose of those kits were to inform policymakers and decision makers with respect to transboundary water management, and it was sort of like an educational tool. But these river awareness kits, RAKs, river awareness kits, and these kits were these RAKs were written from a specific international relations perspective, which was very closely aligned to neoliberal institutionalism. And when reading these river awareness kits, then you all of a sudden and having conducted research on non-state actors and their involvement, you immediately see where the disconnect comes in when you try to educate policymakers and decision makers on transboundary waters. From a specific theoretical perspective, you sort of kick out those local and communal and individual participants that can have an impact on transboundary water politics. And I think often when we separate these levels, as you refer to them, transboundary water politics and transnational role involvement of interest groups, we're doing ourselves as well as policymakers a disfavor, because we often argue that you must, to quote, dumb it down for policymakers. In other words, you must make it as simple as possible so that they can understand it and you can get your message across. However, I don't think that is often we should take that avenue if they can understand the complexity and also how these different complexities and relations interact and have an impact on each other. Then I think it might make for better transboundary water governance and politics.
Thank you, Richard. Just let me thank you again for your talk, for your lecture about Southern Africa water politics, and again let me say that our webinars are here in YouTube for all the audience in English-speaking audience, but as well for Portuguese-speaking language, because afterwards we're going to make the subtitles for Portuguese, and we hope we're going to bring in different perspectives like this conversation for talking about transboundary river basins. Okay, Richard, you can say your last words.
Yes. Now, I would just like to thank you for inviting me to give this presentation on some of the work that I've done in the Okavango River Basin and also in Komati-Usuthu water management area in South Africa. And yes, it's been an experience, not only coming to grips with StreamYard, but also I think this is it's been a lovely experience, talking to you in so far away. And thank you very much for those who also joined in.
Thank you. Our next webinar is going to take place on November 20th. 24th with Hussein from University of Oxford and talking about the Jordan River Basin. Okay, and again, have a nice afternoon in Brazil or evening in South Africa. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Ciao, ciao. Cheers.
Okay, bye-bye.